Hello, and welcome to the Arts National Center on Criminal Justice and Disabilities webinar series today. We are very excited, and we have a full presentation, and we're hoping to get it all in. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Leanne Davis, and I will be facilitating the webinar. I'm the Program Manager for Justice Initiative. And before we get started, I just want to go over some housekeeping rules, especially for those of you who are new to WebEx. Because we do have quite a few people on the webinar, everyone will be in a listen-only mode. And then at the end of the session, there will be an opportunity for people to ask questions. And you can either post those questions in the chat box to the right of your screen or raise your hand using the icon button at the bottom of the participants window, and then we can call on you. If you do have technical problems, we did provide a number to the WebEx help desk there in your chat box, and you can call them should anything happen during the webinar. Please note that this webinar is also being recorded so that you will be able to view it at a later time and share it with others. It will be available on the National Center's website. So I just want to take a minute to introduce to you today our speaker, Dr. Nora Baladarian. She is the director of the Disability Abuse and Personal Rights Project in Los Angeles, California. And she has worked in the area of abuse of people with disabilities since 1972, is a licensed clinical psychologist, a licensed marriage and family therapist, a certified sex therapist, and a board-certified crisis responder. She consults with attorneys and law enforcement officers and has provided expert witness consultation and has authored several guidebooks for professionals, parents, and people with disabilities around the issue of victimization. She's also an advisor for the Arts National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability and a wonderful advocate who the Arts is pleased to welcome as today's speaker. We do have one final request before we begin. You will be receiving a session evaluation immediately after this webinar. So please take a few minutes to fill that out and submit it to us. We are supported from funding through the Department of Justice, and it's very important for us to have a good understanding of what you've learned today and then how we can improve webinars in the future. So speaking of participation, we are very excited that you are here to participate with us in this. And we would like to get started by asking you a few questions through our polling. So I'm going to open up the first poll for today, and that you should be able to see it now to the right of your screen. So if you can go ahead and read over that question and let us know what your thinking is behind this. And we'll give you a few minutes to answer that. And I have just closed the poll and waiting to share the results. So here's the results of the first poll. And here's the second poll now. If you can look at that to the right of your screen and answer that question. All right, and I've just closed that poll, and we'll share this in 1 second. Or 10. All right, and there's the responses for the second poll. And then we've got a couple of more I'm opening right now. Data collection on abuse of children and adults with disabilities is regularly conducted by the government, primarily by law enforcement, by protective services, or by disability service agencies. All right, and I'm going to close this one. Apologize for the delay. It does take a little bit to get the responses tallied, especially when there's more people responding. And so I'm sharing the results of the third poll about data collection. And then our last poll is getting to the issue of barriers. The most powerful barriers to embracing abuse, erasing abuse-related programming, policies, and practices for people with disabilities is. What is the most powerful barrier? The issue itself is too disturbing. There are few, if any, good solutions, so it's impossible to do anything. C, the issue is not a priority. Or D, people with disabilities aren't abused that much, so extra effort on this isn't worth it. Or E, all of the above. And I apologize for the typo there that I just saw, to addressing abuse related. But thank you for answering. And I'm going to go ahead and close this, our final poll. And I will share with the results now. So we had a pretty good broad opinion on all of those, actually. Many different answers. So I want to thank you for taking the time to do those polls, as it really does help us get an idea of your understanding about this issue and the ways that we need to provide training in the future. And now I would like to introduce to you Nora Volodarian, as soon as I find her here. And Nora, it is time for you to present. And just make sure your video is on and your audio is on. Okay. And then your video. Okay.
Hi. I have some trouble finding the thing to click on. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this presentation on an overview of crime victimization of people with disabilities for this project of the Arc of the United States. I'm very excited to be able to do this, and we have a lot of material to cover. So the question that Leanne asked me to address is, what are the issues? So I identified 8 issues that I think will help us cover the ground in terms of what are the problems that exist and how can we overcome them. So the first, as you can see, there's a list. So we have limited time, so maybe there's more slides than I can address. So I'm going to go through this so that we also have time at the end for you to participate by asking your questions or making your comments in the chat box or other places. So first I wanted to address the barriers to abuse discussions and action. And actually I have this at the very end of the presentation, but Leanne and I decided that this is so important that it should go at the very beginning. So what I have found, and I'm sure many of you have also, is just addressing the topic of abuse of people with disabilities causes people to experience these issues, personal fears, exposing their personal lack of education or information. It's just too hard to talk about. I put icky. People get very nervous about it, feeling that nothing they can do, there's nothing they can do, and that's a terrible feeling that you can't do anything. But finally, that it's just too hard to believe that this kind of abuse happens. So what I have encountered with responders, mandated reporters, parents, pretty much the whole world related to abuse of people with disabilities, disability service providers, is they don't want to discuss abuse because it reminds them of their own personal history. And it's important to acknowledge that people, even on this webinar, may start thinking about their own personal history and kind of leave mentally the presentation because they get caught in that memory. So it's important to remember when you're talking about this with other groups that folks are going to be impacted and recalling or triggered their own abuse. Many people just feel so helpless about it. There's nothing we can do. In fact, there are things that we can do, and that's the good news. Even though the numbers are pretty amazing and startling. Also, people say that they would rather not think about abuse, and so they don't go to webinars, they don't go to educational programs, they don't go to trainings. And people do require support in facing these ugly realities, and that's an important role that I think all of us play while we do trainings and talks and do the work. It's important to support other people who may be experiencing this for the very first time. I found that when we place abuse in the context of other tragedies or disasters that can occur, earthquakes, hurricanes, volcanoes, that then it becomes a little bit more manageable than abuse, which just seems so completely unmanageable. The ickiness of the topic, talking about physical abuse, financial, verbal, and emotional abuse, it isn't easy. What I've found over the last, what is it, 10 years, that the word bullying has now become part of the national nomenclature, and that seems to be much more easily discussed than emotional abuse or physical abuse. I don't know why, but I recognize that has occurred. Sexual abuse demands talk about sex, and that still remains to be a big problem in addressing the issue of sexual abuse, which is pervasive. And when we get to the statistics part, we will see just that. And the other thing is that social inhibitors are clearly in place. The social inhibitors are described in the risk reduction book that I've just completed, and those are the things that keep us from saying anything for fear of embarrassment, etc. And those are things that we can work on, get good at, because they only protect the perpetrator. And that's not what we want to be doing, obviously. Another barrier is feeling that abuse can't be handled at the agency level. However, there are many agencies now that are doing an excellent job to create policies, practices, training, opportunities, in-service training about abuse and saying the word abuse and getting used to talking about abuse so that when abuse is suspected or witnessed or reported, the agency itself is in a much better position to report the abuse and have it investigated by an outside agency. There are guidelines for designing effective policies now. They're not costly. They simply require the willingness of the agency and perhaps the board of the agency to address the question of abuse head-on. The biggest barrier, however, is that many people just don't believe abuse happens. This is a barrier that I'm confronting personally right now and have been over the years with law enforcement officers, with other responders, adult protective services, child protective services, with judges, with attorneys, with prosecutors, with defense attorneys, the people who are supposed to be able to protect our kids and adults who have developmental disabilities. When they don't believe that the abuse could possibly happen, they cannot be good advocates. And in that way, they fail the victims of crime. In one circumstance, the attorney said, well, I believe that she believes that she's been abused. That does not make a good advocate. I'm not sure exactly how to cross this barrier. It's too difficult, it's too big, it's too awful. So we need to work together, I think, in helping people be able to cross this bridge. And that includes parents as well, who have a great deal of difficulty believing that this could actually happen to their child or to their loved one. We're going to move now into incidence and prevalence. It's just a quick slide to address the types of abuse that we're discussing here. Abuse is physical, emotional, verbal, sexual, financial, including trafficking and bullying. Neglect is physical and emotional. Most likely to abuse are family and household members, school service providers, schools, transportation personnel, day programs, residential support, in fact, anyone given an authority position over another person. Practitioners, speech therapists, physical therapists, physiatrists, physicians who have solo access to the individual and are implicated, as well as camp staff or other recreational programs. So I think we could probably say that pretty much anyone who is in an authority position over the individual. However, in looking at generic child abuse, when we look at that field and study what we can about perpetrators, we find that only 3% are ever caught and prosecuted, which then really make us take a second look at background checks, for example. And we look at how they access the children. They look normal. They're nice. They seem to be trustworthy and helpful. They can be any gender, age, social, race, or class. Often, they are stable, employed, and respected community members. Pedophilia seems to be an immutable pathology. It doesn't seem to end. And those of you who are on our listserv and read the news feed that we put out every week, you will see that often those perpetrators is 79, 82, in that age range. So it really tells us that pedophiles or those who abuse don't age out of that particular behavior. Perpetrators don't care. They just don't care if the victim or the parent is hurt. They attempt to make the victims feel special, and in order to gain access and in order to not get caught. In other words, to have that person fearful of telling their parents about what's going on. They isolate the victim for their activities, which are benign at the beginning and then get increasingly invasive and abusive. They may expand time that they have with the victim from 10 minutes or from an hour to more and more and more time to have time especially with that one child. And then they say things that keep you off guard, like, oh, you know, perpetrators should be locked up forever and throw away the key. And then you think, oh, yeah, that guy's safe, or that person is safe. This makes it difficult for the care provider to protest or to report when this person is being so helpful and providing so many supportive services. They convince the victim that the victim is responsible for the behavior so that, of course, the victim will not report because, in essence, they're reporting on themselves. They also convince the victim that no one's going to believe them. And in fact, that turns out to be true, as we saw in the earlier slide. So that's something that I think should be a major point of our work as it comes up during the next several years. They may threaten the victim or the family with physical violence if they tell, and they try to normalize the conduct that everybody does this. So, you know, it's not such a big bad thing. Turning now to what we know of statistics, data is collected in age cohorts. So child abuse, 0 to 18 is where child abuse data is collected. Vulnerable adults, generally between 18 and 64, and elder abuse is 64 and over. In child abuse, the National Child Abuse and Neglect Data System, NCAN, collects data on child maltreatment from the states on a voluntary basis. This has been going on over the last 20 years. The data collected includes information on the characteristics of maltreatment reports, children who were the subject of these reports, and services that were provided. It also collects data on the disability of the child. And very specifically, it could be cerebral palsy, it could be what was called mental retardation, now intellectual disability. I don't know if they've changed the nomenclature. But this is very, very helpful for gaining information about abuse among the population of children with disabilities. There is no like NCANS-like program for those over 18. Here's some amazing news that just came to me a couple weeks ago, and that is that the Department of Health and Human Services has funded a pilot study to look at initiating a data collection system like NCANS for the over 18 population. So I'm very excited about this because we will then have data on the types of disabilities people have who are victims, the kind of victimization they experience, their age, where it happened. So this for me is amazing and very exciting news. So I'm excited to share that with you. In terms of where data is collected from, obviously it's mostly from the Protective Services agencies, but a major gap is that we don't have data through law enforcement. Obtaining this data would simply require a change in the uniform crime reporting documentation that every crime is recorded on. However, what we've learned is that in order to make a change and to add that data point would actually require an act of Congress. So that is something that we can continue to pester our congressional representatives about, and I think it would be very important. Meanwhile, I'm very excited that we're finally going to have an NCANS-type data reporting system for people of all ages. Just review, in the United States, it's estimated that 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused before the age of 18. In the United States, it's estimated that 1 in 6 women will be sexually assaulted, and 1 in 33 men will be sexually assaulted during their lifetime. And of course, it's obviously, you know, that some of us who are on this website have experienced sexual assault. But when we compare that to people with children with disabilities, the studies show that somewhere between twice and nearly 4 times the rate of abuse among children with disabilities occurs. So if you do 1 in 4 times 1.7 or 1 in 4 girls times 3.4, it's a big number. Now, when I looked at all of the data for child abuse, elder abuse, and vulnerable adult abuse, I noticed that, putting them in a little row, that we have 2 million elders and 1 million children per year. That's 3 million children and elders compared to 5 million adults and with disabilities who are abused. So I thought a really great sound bite would be to say that adults with disabilities are abused more than children and elders combined. Now, numbers will change over time, so we can continue to look at that, but I think it's really important to know that. The Bureau of Justice Statistics collects data through a household telephone survey that does not include institutions. In last year, I think it was October, they issued their 3rd report, and it addresses people 12 years of age and older. And then it compares rates between people who are abused, who have disabilities, and those who do not have disabilities. So you can look at that data at any time. You can just easily go to Bureau of Justice Statistics, to their website, and collect the data. However, just 2 weeks ago, a new report was issued that showed that people with disabilities are abused at 3 times the rate of those who do not have disabilities. So that's an important data set to stay up to date with and to be able to cite. Some of you are aware, probably many of you are aware, of the 2012 National Survey on Abuse of People with Disabilities, whose report was issued in September of 2013. That survey collected 7,389 responses. Of those, 2,500 responses approximately were from individuals with disabilities and their families. So that data set was taken for analysis. So I wanted to share some of that with you. In that survey, it was found that over 70% of the respondents with disabilities said they were victims of abuse, while 63% of their parents or family members said that their loved one had been abused. And then it talks about the different kinds of abuse, which is on this slide. These slides will be available at our website, and of course this presentation will be available later. So I'm going to kind of skip through this a little bit quickly. But 90% of the victims said that they suffered abuse on multiple occasions. 57% said it was more than 20 times, and 46% said it was too many times to count. Nearly half of the victims did not report the abuse to the authorities, and when asked why, they said they didn't think anything would happen. Of those 54% who said they did report, they said nothing happened. In fewer than 10% of the reported cases were the perpetrators arrested. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of getting the response to reports of abuse believed by those who receive those reports and then properly attended to. 83% of the victims said that therapy was helpful, but 66% of the victims were not referred to a therapist. Fewer than 10% of the victims received benefits from a crime victim program. So that's another gap that I think that we need to take a very serious look at. I wanted to look at reporting of abuse and what happens there. Reporting by victims and family members. Often the victim and the family member are not aware of how to report or to whom to report. Of course they're aware that the police are there, and some are aware of adult protective services or child protective services, but they are confused about whether or not it would be okay to call the police. So that's another area where we need to do some work in supporting families and victims. Some are afraid to report because they may lose the services. Often the perpetrator is someone providing support services to the victim, and they're afraid of losing those services, not the individual, but the services if they make a report. Mandated reporting seems to be a seriously flawed process. I've learned that mandated reporters sometimes sign the document saying, oh yes, I understand what I'm signing and I'm a mandated reporter, but in fact they don't really get it. They don't really understand that their job is to be aware of abuse. If they see or suspect abuse, that is to be reported. So we need to do a little bit of work in creating more awareness on the part of mandated reporters as to what they're supposed to be doing and how they're supposed to be doing that. There are very few charges against people for failing in their duty as a mandated reporter, and of course fewer prosecutions of the same. There is a cascade of system failures that needs to be addressed. Often, investigators, when they respond, do not speak to the victim. They speak to the persons around the victim, the family members, who actually, or other household members, or day program, who actually might be the abuser or perceived agent of the perpetrator or an agent of the perpetrator. Not saying it's their fault, investigators often don't have training in how to work with children and adults with cognitive and or communication disabilities, but that would be the time to seek support and to create a bridge between something new to them and learning how to do it, or referring it to somebody who already has the training or the experience. But not to make up a protocol that's different, kind of on the spot, which has happened, feeling the pressure of wanting to do something, but then doing things that aren't according to a protocol. They want to clear the case, but without talking to the victim themselves, it makes it difficult to do that. Sometimes agencies also don't take appropriate action after learning about abuse. Now, of course, the State Departments of Developmental Services all have their protocols on what one is to do when receiving an SIR or, okay, at the moment I'm blanking what that means, but it's an incident report that's sent in by a vendor, or even usually by a vendor, someone who provides services to folks with disabilities. However, these reports don't always result in the discharge of the person who's abused or an investigation by an outside agency, and then even later support to the victim. Regional centers in the state of California and other disability services receive the reports too, and they have policies and rules about this and what they're supposed to do, but often they don't take an action regarding the employment of the perpetrator, and they don't provide therapy services or support services or an alternative program for the person who's been a victim of crime. The law enforcement response, we will talk about longevity and effectiveness of training. First of all, training programs are not universally mandated, and I think that that's the direction that we're hopefully going in nationally, is to include effective training programs on working with people with developmental disabilities. And of course, there's no one-size-fits-all. A lot of the law enforcement agencies around the country are small, very small, and they have many duties. They have burglary and then abuse of people with disabilities and then traffic. So even so, there is some training that I believe could be done to assist in guiding principles related to interviewing and interacting with individuals with cognitive and communication disabilities. Sometimes there's agency training for a while. There's a grant, or there's a particular interest, or an officer or somebody else at the law enforcement agency has a special interest, and programs have been in place for, say, 5 years or something like that. But then the person gets transferred, and the interest or the push gets transferred out too. So we need to do something where that program remains over time. There are resources, but they need to be utilized. Background checks. Background checks is a really amazing and wonderful thing, but knowing that only 3% of pedophiles are ever caught and convicted, it tells us that 97% aren't going to show up on a background check. So we need to do more than a background check, and I really do support doing background checks before an employee begins, as well as every 6 months or at least annually after that. But there's other ways to do background checks and employment checks and those kinds of things. But abuse and neglect from APS may not show up on a background check. So we need to be also looking at that issue. Victim services. Access to victim services is the key. And so we need to know how to access the Victims of Crime program in each of our areas and to see what it is that they provide. Lack of access to this information seems to be a national norm according to the 2012 survey and according to participants in conferences and groups and committees that have discussed this issue. Now, victims of crime agencies can do outreach to the disability community, and the disability community can do outreach to the victim community. In California, we have Marcy's Law, which says that police officers must provide information about the Victims of Crime program to crime victims. I want to talk a little bit about trauma-informed caregiving. Notice our time is going really fast. That with the numbers that I have just provided to you, and which I'm sure most of you already knew, it must be assumed that the people to whom we are providing services, whether it's work program or day program or residential services, are very likely to have been victims of abuse. So I think it's incumbent upon us to begin to have all of our programs work consistently within a trauma-informed caregiving parameter, or according to the principles of trauma-informed caregiving. With our recognition of the extent of abuse, it really seems to be, it should be a mandate. There are some books and training programs on trauma-informed caregiving, and when we're using trauma-informed caregiving, we respond differently when for example, when an individual is so-called acting out, that means they're acting something out. So when a person tells me, oh, this person is acting out, I say, what are they acting out? Because that is the real meaning of the term. And it turns out that they could be acting out an abuse that happened to them, or abuses that happened to them, or pain or sadness or terror may be the cause of their behavior, or their changed moods, or their changed interest in activity. It's very important to look at things with an eye to trauma that they may have experienced. Lastly, I want to talk about risk reduction and how we can reduce the risk that abuse occurs in the first place. It's so much easier to have a program before than the trauma, unrequited trauma afterwards. I believe that each family with a person with a disability should be encouraged and supported in a loving way to address this part of life. Families are given information about so many things, about medical issues, educational issues, legal issues, conservatorship, but rarely are they provided sufficient information about abuse. They should be given access to information that encourages them to develop an individual response plan for their child. That means that they should know what to do, like for any other trauma or disaster. What should they do before that will equip this child, or adult child or minor, in the event that abuse happens? What should that child know? What can that child do if they feel uncomfortable with someone that they're working with? Do they know the names of everyone that they're working with? Do they have pictures of everyone that they're working with that would assist them in telling about an abuse situation if that were to occur? The parents also are woefully undereducated related to abuse, and they should be provided information that will help them also. Now, many parents don't know what they're supposed to say, what they're supposed to do, if they learn about abuse or if abuse is disclosed to them. What the victim needs is for that parent to be present, to listen, to pay attention to the victim, not to go into their own personal emotional trauma upon hearing this very traumatic news. They also need to know what to do if the abuse was sexual. and things to do and things to not do. Prevention and community efforts can include school-based abuse prevention programs focused on providing services to children and families after abuse has happened, but they too could institute their own risk reduction program to do their best to make sure that abuse does not happen on their watch or on their campus. Let me see, I just want to go one more slide here, I think. Parents are not informed about the epidemic of abuse, so I think that it would be really helpful if parents and individuals with disabilities could make a plan of what they should do and know before abuse ever happens. What they should do while an abuse is happening. Most of the time, they're not going to be able to run away or get away, so they should know what it is that they should do that will best serve them while the abuse is happening, regardless of what kind of abuse it is. And then what they could do, should do afterwards. What's the best thing for them to do afterwards? So the plan should include before, during, and after, just like an earthquake or hurricane plan. How do you prepare before? Of course, you hope it never happens, but if it happens, you know what to do during, and then what to do after. One easy thing that I think agencies can do is to distribute the 10 tips flyer. It's a flyer that was developed after an abuse experience in California. And I'm going to give you the abbreviated version here. And this is for parents or family members to know and believe that abuse can happen. If you don't really believe that it's going to happen, you're not going to really prepare for it, and you're not going to be able to discern that the signs of abuse are signs of abuse. They may be attributed to something else. When you suspect something is wrong, honor that feeling and call the police or adult protective services or child protective services. It's so important not to discuss your suspicions with anyone where the abuse has happened or the suspected abuse has happened. You want to remove your child immediately. And if there are physical injuries or conditions, take your loved one to a physician, get documentation, and begin a journal about what you have noticed, when, the date, with whom you spoke, etc. And then notify your disability service agency as well after you call the police. Then it's good to get a police report and contact the victims of crime programs in your area. Now, I started this presentation with barriers to abuse and discussion and action, but I wanted to end with this slide. And this is the slide where we talk about it's very hard for the people to believe. And I wanted to tell you a story of someone who was in that situation. And this is a person who I served on the California Children's Justice Act Task Force for about 7 years. And at the 10th annual National Conference on Abuse of People with Disabilities, which at that time, in Riverside, California, which at that time he was the public defender for the county of Riverside, I asked him if he would welcome the conference and open the conference. And he said that he would be glad to do that. And also, you know, the sheriff came and the district attorney, etc. So he was among others welcoming folks to the National Conference on Abuse of People with Disabilities. And his story made a big impression on me. He mentioned that he and I had been on the Children's Justice Act Task Force for about 7 years together. And he said, Nora pointed out, children with disabilities, we have to pay attention to children with disabilities. Each grant needs to address these needs of children with disabilities. And he said, blah, blah, blah. Nora was always talking about children with disabilities and their special needs, and we have to attend to them properly. And that was pretty boring to him because it was his understanding, kids are kids. And that whatever program there is, it's going to be addressing kids with disabilities. And so we don't really, he just considered me, he basically said, as a windbag, which, you know, I didn't think was that complimentary, but that's okay. But he said, then my little granddaughter, when she was 5 years old, acquired a disability and my world changed. I didn't know about the difficulties with education and getting a special education, and that IEP existed, but not only was there an IEP, but it was difficult. It was a fight to get her the services that she needed. And everything else was a fight. It was terrible: transportation, medical appointments, medical services. Everything that she needed wasn't easy like when she didn't have a disability. Now it was a fight for everything for her. And he said, I'm only here today, Monday morning, and this is my only activity this week that I'm carrying out. I'm taking the rest of the week off because last week my little granddaughter died. On Saturday we buried her, and I realized that I had to come to this conference today, the 10th National Conference on Abuse of People with Disabilities, to tell you that this is a problem and that children and adults with disabilities require special attention. He said, I want you to know that I am grateful for this conference, and I'm grateful for my little granddaughter for opening my eyes and teaching me that what Nora was saying all those years was true. I just didn't get it. I get it now. And I'm very grateful to my little granddaughter for teaching me this. And now I'm going to go and be with my family and my wife and mourn the loss of our little granddaughter. I thought it was so powerful. I didn't understand how it was that I could inform the folks around the table about abuse and children with developmental disabilities and how important it is to make sure that services provided, whatever we were going to be funding, also address the needs of these children. I didn't know that Gary and the others were like, yeah, you know, kids with disabilities, it's all the same. It's not the same. So I so appreciate Gary telling his personal story, because now I understand a little bit more. And maybe it is that people have to have their own personal experience before they can understand. I hope not. I hope that people can begin to believe that children with disabilities are abused. They're abused in terrible ways. In my experience, children and adults with developmental disabilities who are nonverbal are abused more and maybe even more viciously than children who do not have communication disabilities, because in those ways the perpetrator believes that he will never be caught because that child cannot tell. Well, there's a big surprise for perpetrators, because there's many ways to work with nonverbal kids and adults to learn what has happened to them. Thank goodness. So it's important for us to be aware that abuse does happen, and I hope that you will join me in the quest of helping responders believe that children with disabilities do become victims of abuse. I'm wanting you to know also that there are solutions. I don't think we need more laws. We need implementation of the existing laws. We need training, and I'm sure you'll all agree, for all service providers, family members, people with disabilities. We need increased public awareness. We need training for all criminal and civil law representatives. We need to create effective data collection systems, which is why I'm so excited about the new NCANS program for adults. We need to ensure a viable communication system for victims with disabilities, where their AAC, augmentative and alternative communication devices and systems and methods, are accepted and respected in court and during investigations. We need to conduct nonverbal IQ testing with nonverbal individuals that will help in assuring that folks understand that there's a lot of intelligence that's hidden, perhaps by behavior or perhaps the observation of one. You don't think that a person really is smart, but they in fact are quite smart. But quick kind of judgments that we make obliterate that, and then we don't take appropriate connection and communication with individuals with disabilities. And also complying with ADA requirements. I know that it sounds maybe obvious, and it doesn't need to be mentioned, but it does need to be mentioned because ABA requirements in court, in investigations, making more time for the interviews, absolutely needs to be put in place and honored and accommodations made. I wanted to talk to you for just a second about resources. And at the disabilityandabuse.org website, we maintain a national discussion group that is free. Anyone can join. As I mentioned, we have a weekly news feed, which you can just find on the website if you want to go there once a week and pick it up, and a national list of consultants and a resource section. At the ARC, with the program under which this program is being produced today, they are building a robust resources and references list of people and items, DVDs, etc. I wanted to just make sure that we put on this website the videos that exist for law enforcement and others responding to crime victims on forensic interviewing, on first response, on how to interact appropriately, the crime victims with disabilities, what the prosecutor needs to know. It's a fabulous training video, and leanonus.org has a wonderful list of documents that you can use and provide to law enforcement. I hope this has been helpful to you. I look forward to your questions. Leanne, if you want to help with any questions that there might be. And again, the PowerPoint presentation will be available through reviewing this presentation, and it will be on the website of the Disability and Abuse Project again.
All right, thank you, Nora. And actually, you can stay on video. And I do have one question for you from Renee. What type of training should agencies provide, and what is available?
Provide to whom?
That was a more general open question. So I guess if you want to just address that generally.
Okay, an agency, it's really hard because I don't know what agency they're referring to, but if an agency wanted to provide training, as I said, I think families really need to be given the opportunity to learn about abuse and what they should do before, during, and after, the signs that they should know, and how would they report suspected abuse. Again, it's like mandated reporters. You don't have to be the detective and the investigator and the arbiter of whether abuse occurred and what it was and who done it. But your suspicion of abuse is all that needs to be reported. Training for law enforcement, for responders, so that would be law enforcement, et cetera, victims, providers. I think that they need to understand about how people with developmental disabilities think, communicate, interact, what their lifestyles are like. And as you know, there's many different kinds of developmental disabilities and variations. Even if you were just taking one category, say autism, the variations in people with autism are huge. And so a training would need to address the fact that there's many variations, but give some key points on how to best communicate, but also not to make assumptions or to check your assumptions or to be aware that you're making an assumption about someone when you view them and then you make a diagnosis, for example. And we all know that judging a book by its cover is not a clever plan, and especially not a clever plan when you're the person responding and responsible for determining what abuse occurred and what are the next steps for that victim.
All right, thank you, Nora. And I do have a couple of easier questions here. Can you repeat where the PowerPoint is located on the website? So I think you're referring to your website.
Right, we're going to put that up during the next week, and the website is disability. I don't know how to go backwards. You know how to go backwards? Anyway, it's disabilityandabuse.org. So just go to disabilityandabuse.org and then click on resources, and it'll be up during the next week.
And then another question is, can we find the 10 tips online somewhere? The 10 tips.
Yes, yes, that's also available on our website. I think it's called not Top 10 Tips, but a guide for parents, and it's also available at disability.gov. If you have to kind of hunt around a little bit, but you just go to views there, and it's available there as well. And what I'm suggesting is it's one page, so you put that on one side of a flyer, and then on the opposite side can be your agency information or other information about abuse if you want, or resources. But I have had this vetted by parents and parents groups, and they feel like if they had this, they say, if I had this 10 tips before my child was abused, I would have acted more quickly. I would have known what to do. I would have called the police. And they feel very empowered by just having that one sheet of paper. So I really encourage you to use it. And of course, include, that it was produced by the Disability and Abuse Project.
All right. Well, thank you, Nora. I'm going to go ahead and take back the ball.
Oh, no. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
And let's see here. There is Nora's information. And we just so appreciate you for giving such a great presentation today. And we hope to maybe hear back from you at another time, hopefully. And appreciate all that you've done in the field as well. So thank you for being on the call. And we did have other questions we weren't able to get to, but we will absolutely get those to Nora, and she will be able to get some information back to you on that. And we did want to go ahead and announce our next webinar for March. The title is Can You Hear Me? Connecting the Dots and Building Collaboration to Support People with Disabilities Who Experience Sexual Violence. And that is going to be by Beverly France with the Institute on Disabilities. There's a link right here that you can click on to register. And also, we wanted to remind you to get connected and stay involved. And you can sign up to receive email alerts and use the INR service, as well as learn about our latest products and services and stay up to date about the latest in policy development. And we also just want to hear from you as we're collecting a database of stories about some families and others who are needing services and help related to criminal justice and disability issues. So thank you so much for being on the call today. We really do appreciate you coming each and every time. And we are experiencing so many people wanting to get on these calls that actually some got turned away today. So we'll make sure that we address that in the future. We would like you again to fill out this survey that is listed here. Once you leave the webinar, you will be taken directly to the survey. It only takes a few short minutes, and it really helps us to get the data we need to continue doing our work and for our funder. And we are very excited to announce, too, that we launched the website for the National Center just yesterday. So now you have a place to go to find these webinars, which each one will be archived. So you can go and get it at any time and let people know about it. And then, of course, we do have our email address there for questions, too. So thank you so much for being on this webinar today. And we look forward to seeing you in March for our next webinar. Thank you.